Martin Odegaard's equalising goal for Arsenal against Manchester United in the 3-1 defeat at the Emirates is a perfect example of why Manchester United needs Sophie and Amrabat, as from a defensive point of view I just don't think you can play Christian Eriksen in a double pivot, particularly in these big games. And I would even go as far to say that if Amrabat was playing, not only would Odegaard not have scored that equalising goal, but United at the very least would have got something out of the game. We can see here as Arsenal have settled possession in the middle third, that United are defending in a 4-2-3-1, which at times will obviously become a 4-4-1-1 depending on how deep the wide players come. But whatever you want to call it, you can see Christian Eriksen is sitting in a double pivot alongside Casemiro. And the issue for Christian Eriksen throughout the game, not just in this specific example, was that Martin Odegaard was sitting slightly wide of him in that familiar position between the lines. And so Eriksen didn't know whether to zonally mark the space or drop deeper to pick up Martin Odegaard, but in this position he really does neither. Lindelof follows Nketiah when he drops out from the forward line in between Casemiro and Eriksen, but I don't really see much of an issue at the moment. The issue comes when Arsenal are able to work the ball into the final third, and now Eriksen has to make a decision. He either has to go with Odegaard or move across to the ball to cover Nketiah. But due to Christian Eriksen's lack of athleticism, he just doesn't have the legs to come across. And even in the build up to the goal, you could see Lisandro Martinez in the back line seem to be more focused on trying to communicate to Eriksen what he should do rather than focusing on his own positioning. But before I go any further, remember to subscribe to the channel and check out my Patreon podcast, which will be linked below. But also, if you want cheap good quality football jerseys for the new season or retro jerseys from the past 40 years, then check out jerseyfever.com. A link will be in my Instagram bio, and if you use coupon code Atlantis, you should get a discount as well. I'll leave my Instagram at the top of the description and comment section, and a link will be in my Instagram bio. And so this means that both Lisandro Martinez and Christian Eriksen are caught between Nketiah and Odegaard, with neither being close enough to actually pick them up. And so when Zinchenko plays his pass inside, Nketiah is able to move the ball onto Martinelli. Martinez has made the move out of the back line too late, and so now Eriksen feels like he's obligated to drop deep into that space, which just leaves Martin Odegaard completely open on the edge of the box. And so when the pass comes from Martinelli, Odegaard just steps onto the ball and side foots it past Onana in goal, cancelling United's lead out within a minute or so. I think if Amrabat's in this position rather than Eriksen, first of all Lisandro Martinez is not as concerned because he knows that Amrabat has the legs to make up the ground to either move on to Nketiah or move back to Odegaard. And so this will just give an added sense of security amongst United's whole defensive shape. As well as Christian Eriksen is certainly a liability in these kind of defensive areas, Amrabat excels in them, and so even though it's pretty unquantifiable, I just think Amrabat's presence in this kind of position instantly improves United just because other players around him have more confidence that he can do these sorts of defensive duties. Another defensive area where I think Amrabat will massively improve United is stopping counter-attacks, as Amrabat adds just so much more defensive ability and athleticism to United's rest defence compared to either Eriksen or Mount. Now rest defence is essentially your deeper players when you have the ball, the players that are there to protect you against a counter-attack, and for Ten Hag's United this is likely to be a 2-3 or a 3-2 shape. Now I would go with a 3-2 with Casemiro and Amrabat playing as a double pivot, sitting in deeper positions, and have one of the fullbacks along with the two centre-backs sitting behind in a back three. Now the reason I think a double pivot of Amrabat and Casemiro works so well in this rest defence is because both players have the athleticism and the tackling ability to move across into wide positions and not just track the opposition players with the ball but actually put in a tackle to win the ball back. Before Amrabat arrived, United were incredibly reliant on Casemiro to do this, and in the first few games of the season I actually felt he was very poor in these kind of tackling situations, often moving out far too aggressively and early and just getting beaten in 1v1s that usually last season he was winning. But I think the problem's being exacerbated because Casemiro has to cover so much space. Because United are using effectively a 3-1-6 shape in possession, this means that they only have a rest defence of a 3 and a 1, with Casemiro being that 1. And even when both of United's fullbacks are holding deeper positions alongside the centre-backs, we don't really see one of the fullbacks invert in field and make a double pivot alongside Casemiro. They tend to just drop back into the back line, and so this leaves Casemiro with a huge amount of space to cover in the centre of the pitch when the opposition win the ball, and I think he knows that if he backs off and allows the opposition to run forward with the ball, he's just going to get isolated and played round anyway. And so because he doesn't want to get isolated with the opposition carrying the ball, he moves out far too early when he probably shouldn't, overcommits, and this just leads to him getting bypassed, and it just leaves bigger spaces in the centre of the pitch for the opposition to exploit. But if Casemiro has Amrabat alongside him, he now knows that he doesn't really have to win the ball high up the pitch, he can more jockey the opposition player, knowing that Amrabat is next to him to close off that space and stop him getting isolated. And so once again, this is an example of how Amrabat's sheer presence on the pitch will give other players more confidence around him and improve United's overall defensive shape. Now, the obvious concern about removing Christian Eriksen from the team, which is probably why Ten Hag has decided to put him back in the team as of recent, is because his creative ability, particularly from deeper positions, but also as he showed in this match by winning the ball back and then playing the through ball for Marcus Rashford, is significantly greater than pretty much all of United's other options who can play in that double pivot, including Casemiro. And whilst Amrabat certainly isn't as creative as Eriksen in the final third, and probably isn't the sort of player who you want to be playing those killer through balls, in terms of his overall ability in possession, in terms of his progressive passing, his ability to circulate the ball efficiently, I really don't think Amrabat is a step down from Eriksen in this regard. And so factor in the increased defensive and athletic ability that Amrabat would bring to that double pivot, and I really don't see any significant negatives with taking Eriksen out of the team and putting Amrabat into that double pivot alongside Casemiro. Now, in the short term, I think putting Amrabat into that midfield definitely improves United, but I can see some long-term issues as I don't really see how Amrabat, Casemiro and the fullbacks all work together in synchronicity. And I think this becomes pretty obvious once we actually look at United's rest defence setup. If you look at Wan-Bissaka, Malacia, Shaw and even Dalot to a degree, you pretty much always want these players in the deeper part of the pitch, just because their attacking output in the final third isn't at the elite level, and by elite level I mean as good as players like Trent, Teo, or even players like Kyle Walker or Robertson. And so if you had Wan-Bissaka and Luke Shaw as the starting fullbacks, you want them a part of that rest defence setup, ideally playing essentially as wide centre-backs in a back three, alongside the other two centre-backs, and then have Casemiro and Amrabat in front, completing that 3-2 rest defence setup. However, obviously if you got Casemiro and Amrabat in front and then Martinez and say Lindelof, that means that you need to push one of the fullbacks forward into the front five, and whilst all four can definitely provide some over and underlapping runs into the final third when needed, if United want to get anywhere near Arsenal or Manchester City, they need fullbacks who can essentially contribute like attackers in the final third. Either that or you have to drop one of Casemiro or Amrabat, which I just don't see as a viable option, at least for this season anyway. I mean, you could go with one of Casemiro or Amrabat in that deep single pivot position and play Mount and Fernandes ahead, have them two in the half space in the front five, and then have one of the fullbacks invert. I definitely think that Dalot can play this role, but he's not playing it to an elite level, and for me, having Luke Shaw or Wan-Bissaka invert in field is just a recipe for disaster. And so I think that when we come to next season, Ten Hag's going to have some tactical evolution. Either he sticks with Amrabat and Casemiro and tries to bring in new fullbacks who can add something different, preferably players like Jeremy Frimpong on the right or Teo Hernandez on the left, who essentially provide the output of attackers when in the final third, or maybe bring in another central midfielder who can play either as a 6 or an 8, but has the attacking qualities in the final third of someone like Mason Mount or Bruno Fernandes. But my point overall is that whilst putting Amrabat into this side does solve a lot of United's issues in the short term, there are still cohesive issues with the squad as a whole that Ten Hag is going to have to fix sooner or later. So thank you for watching. If you enjoyed that video, remember to subscribe to the channel, check the description for more videos, and subscribe to my Patreon if you do want